Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome. Hello, Kara.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. Thank you, everyone. Oh, I see everyone joining in. We're going to start shortly. Just a few more minutes, maybe 1 minute or two. How's everyone doing today? Please feel free to use the chat. I hope the chat is working this time. I'm gonna test it out and make sure it's working. Yes, it is working. Yay, awesome, thank you. Oh, so let me fix that. Thank you for letting me. Okay. Hi, everyone. Okay, so we are going to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today for our session 5 of the McKinney-Vento Community of Practice. So today we will be talking about identifying and meeting the needs of students experiencing homelessness with a focus on pregnant, parenting, or caregiving students. So we have a lot of contents today, yes, so let's go ahead and get started. Thanks, Evelyn. We are going to start off by asking you to please sign in the chat by telling, some of you are already doing that, by telling us your name of your district, your role, and a one-word description of how you are doing today. Please take a moment to do that now. Thank you. Hi, Don. Hi, Steve. Hi, Paige. Hi, Nina. Yes, please feel free to tell us your role as well and describe how you're doing today. Hi, Jacqueline. Hi, Rosalind. Thank you. All good. Thank you. Well, good. Awesome. Fine. Great. So we're going to move on. Keep sharing. A couple of housekeeping stuff. This is a webinar style Zoom. So all participants are muted and have their cameras off. But questions can be asked throughout the session in the chat box, and we will try to answer as many as possible. We won't have any breakout rooms today or polling quizzes. If you find yourself leaving this session today with unanswered questions, please do not hesitate to reach out to us on the COHHIO team or our guest speakers. Today's material link can be found in the chat or on the COHHIO Course to Home webpage, where we will also be able, you will also be able to find the recording and notes of this for this session by the end of the week. And if you have any audio video issues, try to exit and come back in. With that, can you please move on to the next slide? Thank you, Evelyn. With that, we will start today's session with an overview of the intersection of homelessness and pregnant parenting youth, followed by the unique needs of pregnant parenting youth experiencing homelessness. We will provide you with some strategies and best practices to meet the needs of these students. Then we will wrap up our session with some Q&As, quick reminders about the COHHIO Course to Home, and leave you with some resources as always. Next slides, please. Okay, so today's objective is for you to understand the intersection of homelessness and pregnant parenting youth. As I said, learn some best practices for meeting their needs, and also all the available resources to support pregnant and parenting youth experiencing homelessness. So this is our awesome team at COHHIO. We've provided a lot of introduction in the past, so I'm not going to take a lot of time with that today. As many of you know, my name is Ami Diallo. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm one of the youth housing initiative specialists here at COHHIO. And I'm joined by my wonderful colleague, Evelyn Guerin. She can shake her hand. And you will also get to meet our new director, Amanda Wilson, who's not here today at the next session. As you know, our role here at COHHIO is to support you in meeting the need of students experiencing homelessness by providing trainings, technical assistance, and resources. And as always, joined by a wonderful team at ODE, Susanna Wayland and Ashley Huser, always here to support you. Next slide, please. And with that, we are super excited to welcome Sarah Haig from the Ohio Department of Health, Dr. Holly Papada from the Hospital Council of Northwest Ohio, and Nicole Harris from the Center of Healthy Families, who will introduce themselves and tell us more about pregnant, parenting, or caregiving students. Sarah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Ami. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sarah Haig, and I'm the Adolescent Health Coordinator at the Ohio Department of Health. Part of my role here at ODH is to manage our youth homelessness grants, which is why I'm here. I'm so glad that we're able to connect this work, as we know that health and education outcomes are so connected. And we also know that youth experiencing homelessness have a variety of needs. So a comprehensive approach is really necessary to serve those individuals. We also at ODH work very closely with COHHIO and Amanda's team, and they actually facilitate a community of practice for our grantees as well. So again, very happy to be able to be here and speak to you all. When Amanda asked if I would come and speak on this topic, I said, sure, I'm happy to, but I recommended asking a couple of our sub-grantees to really come and be the ones who are giving the presentation. I manage the grants, but they're the ones out in the community working directly with young people, and they're really the experts on this topic. They have way more hands-on expertise in this area than I can share. So I'm going to just do a brief overview of our grant program, and then I'll kick it over to them to really give you the content. So ODH received funding in the state budget in fiscal year 19 and 20 to address youth homelessness. So that turned into 2 different grant programs that have been funded for 3 years. And really the overall approach for these grant programs is to be community-based and provide comprehensive services for youth who are experiencing homelessness or pregnant youth who are experiencing homelessness. So while not all of our 13 subrecipients' sole focus is on pregnant youth, we do have a couple of agencies who really do focus on pregnant or parenting youth for a bulk of their project. So 2 of them are here today, and I'm very excited to hear them share their great work with you all. We know that youth experiencing homelessness, again, face many challenges and barriers, have poorer health and education outcomes than their peers. And our grantees, they provide or coordinate housing services, health or mental health services, education or employment services, connection to the community, and outreach to identify youth who are experiencing homelessness. The program was designed to be flexible and to support needs, services, or individuals that may not be eligible for other more strict sources of funding. So in that end, we use McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness to determine eligibility for our program as well. So our grantees can serve youth who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. The age range for our grant is ages 14 to 24, so youth or young adults. And again, the programs we fund are spread across Ohio. All of our programs are quite different, really to adapt to their community structure and their community needs. Elevating and leveraging community partnerships is a major focus of our grant. I can put my email in the chat, and if anybody's interested in learning who we fund and where they're located, let me know, and I'm happy to share that. I'm hoping that you all have connections to housing providers in your communities. But if not, the partners that the programs that we serve would be wonderful partners to engage with within your community. So The two speakers that we have today manage projects in Toledo and Columbus. I've worked closely with both Holly and Nicole over the past 2-ish years that I've been in this role. And both of these programs are doing amazing work in their communities with young people. So I'm excited to turn it over to Holly to get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I am here to speak about two different topics, but a little bit about me. I am the Assistant Director at the Northwest Ohio Pathways Hub. I am a recipient of that Homeless Youth Grant. We at the Hub actually serve clients who are pregnant, parenting or of childbearing age, as well as adults. But historically, and even now, we serve a lot of pregnant clients. That's kind of what we're known in the community for. And we do certainly have a percentage of our clients are youth. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about two different things today. The first is the intersection of homelessness and pregnant and parenting youth. And then the second topic I'm going to talk about is the unique needs of pregnant and parenting youth experiencing homelessness. Next slide, please. So the first thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is intersectionality and what it is and why it's so important. Next slide, please. So the term intersectionality is fairly new, but I feel like it's kind of a more common buzzword now. So this was coined in 1989. And essentially what it is all these different pieces that make us up. And all of these different things, as you can see in the diagram on the right, contribute to essentially what makes us us. But it can also contribute to our experience in the world and how people perceive us and our health outcomes. And that could also obviously roll into our educational outcomes as well. Next, please. Next slide, please. So it's important because everything is influenced by these social categories, right? So our age, right? So being a minor or a youth, our race, our ethnicity, our culture, all those different things play a role. And we obviously know that both racism and oppression are a piece of that. And we'll talk a little bit about that, as well as discrimination in a little bit, especially in regards to youth and pregnant youth. So we know that a lot of those social structures can also play a role or be influenced by all those different things that we're experiencing and what makes us up. So we know that privilege and power also, can play a role with this as well, based on those different pieces of basically who we are. Next slide, please. So personal identity is a piece of this. It could also be things that we can change. So our education level, right? We can complete that degree or that program. We can change our occupation. We could even convert our religion, but there's other things that we can't change, right? So our skin color, so how people perceive us, where we originate from, if we have a criminal history, and all of that sort of comes together, and it can either empower us, or it can also marginalize us, and we can experience discrimination or other disparities as well. Next slide, please. So we know that there are these, I kind of already talked about this a little bit, but discrimination-based intersecting social structures can impact our other personal identity pieces. So racism, ableism, ageism, which a lot of times I think when we think of ageism, we think of older adults, but it could certainly also work in the reverse as a young adult or a person who is a minor and has a child. Also, of course, non-binary or LGBTQ persons as well. Next slide, please. So the last layer of this is really the systemic societal structure. So the economy, the educational inequality, politics, religion, all of these can impact us as well. So this complicates the lives of youth experiencing homelessness, which I'm sure many of you know. And this can also, impact their outcomes, right? So their sort of end goals and how their life ends up playing out. Next slide, please. So I just thought there's a survey that's fairly comprehensive, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes from this study. But I really liked this quote. It says, intersectionality encourages us to consider how upstream social determinants like racism, sexism, classism, transphobia, and queerphobia form interlocking systems of oppression, which shape the experience of people with multi-dimensional identities. So kind of talking about the fact that we're all not just one thing, right? So we're not all just a white person or a Black person or a pregnant person or a teen, right? There's all those different layers that make up who we are. So we really need to take everything into account and realize that not everyone is the same, right? So I'll talk a little bit about it in a few minutes, but a pregnant person who is in an educational system could be impacted or treated differently based on their race or their socioeconomic status or resources that they have access to. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. Next slide, please. So we know that intersectionality applies to all HUD participants, including youth who are experiencing homelessness, and that all of these different things contribute to or can contribute to feelings of rejection or feelings of powerlessness. Next slide, please. So from this survey, which is the most sort of comprehensive one that I could find, they found that the most common causes of homelessness with the youth that they surveyed were family conflict, tumultuous home environments, and actually being rejected by family because of their pregnancy. So obviously that fits in today's discussion. And then also rejected by family because of their identity as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, or other non-binary. Next slide, please. So this data collection, obviously, as any study, has some limitations. So this was actually in a partnership with the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio and Ohio Department of Education. They acknowledge the underreporting of homeless youth counts. So I think that this is a struggle, and as I know it is in our community, to get an adequate or accurate count of the homeless population in any community, but especially that of youth. They talk a little bit about their data collection processes, and they are currently under review and revision. There was some discussion about how school districts were struggling with identifying homeless students. And some of this also came into play with COVID-19 and students not being in the classroom or not being visible, just kind of having those homeschooling dynamics, and how obviously if you're not seeing the person, you might not necessarily know what they're experiencing. And then obviously the stigma. So the stigma of being homeless and having that struggle. And we know that when someone says they're homeless, some people even joke about it, right? You know, I know I've been on calls before where someone's like, oh, you know, I don't look great today, I look homeless. And so I know that that's a very common sort of term, and it's offensive, right? Because we do have students who are experiencing that, and that could be hurtful to them, and they might not want to admit that to anyone. Next slide, please. So for this survey, they basically found that 4.2 million US youth, so they're defining youth in this case as ages 13 to 25, experience homelessness every year. 1 in 10 young adults ages 18 to 25, so we're talking about obviously not minors, and at least 1 in 30 adolescent minors, so ages 13 to 17, experience some degree of homelessness or deep housing insecurity every year. So they're including time on the streets and shelters, couch surfing, as well as doubling up. So kind of going back to that McKinney-Vento definition of homelessness. 1 million children also had a young parent who were experiencing homelessness in the last year in 2017. So a lot of the research talks about how obviously it's not just the youth, right? In many cases, their children are also homeless. And obviously we know that there are a lot of there's a lot of impactful things that happen that can obviously sort of change the outcome or the sort of things that are occurring for that child who does not have a stable, safe place to live. Next slide, please. So there are disproportionate challenges for homeless youth in intersectional subcategories. So pregnant or parenting youth, Black or African-American youth, and also youth that are aging out of foster care. So one of the things that I think is really important to note is that there's a lot of research out there about the impact between pregnant and parenting youth, and how we know that Black and African-American youth are actually more likely to become pregnant when they're minors versus other races or ethnicities. And we also know that children who are from lower socioeconomic statuses are also more likely to become pregnant when they are minors. And so obviously one of the issues with that is that that can certainly impact their housing situation, right? So we know that if a person gets pregnant and, you know, they have a family with resources, they're likely going to have a better outcome or more stable housing than a family with a young minor who maybe already is struggling, right? They're already at risk of homelessness, or they don't have those same resources. So that can obviously sort of trickle down to other parts of their life, including school. Aging out of foster care is huge. I know Ohio has a program that they work specifically with that. And we have a few agencies that are local that also that we work closely with that specifically address that. Next slide, please. So this is just showing the breakdown from the survey of those who were pregnant or were parenting. So 10% were female between the ages of 13 and 17, 44% were female between the ages of 18 and 25. And then this was males who had a pregnant partner or were parenting. Only 3% of male 13 to 17-year-olds and 18% of males 18 to 25. So you can also see how obviously one's sex, or I think in this case it was sex, but gender could also play a role, right? And sort of how that parenting journey may play out as well. Next slide, please. This is just sort of reiterating that idea, that statistic that 1.1 million children approximately had a young parent who had experienced homelessness in the last year, and they didn't have that stability. Next slide, please. So this is talking a little bit more about those children who are raised by young homeless parents, and 43% of the 18 to 25-year-old young women and 29% of the 18 to 5-year-old young men reported it having at least one child, and 22% of young women and 14% of young men who had not experienced homelessness during the last year reported having at least one child. So we can see that those people, those young people who had children were more likely to be homeless than to have a stable place to live. Next slide, please. So this survey spoke a lot about how homeless youth reached out and wanted to engage with services when they're pregnant or after becoming a parent. And they talk about a little bit how they did this even though they had those negative provider experiences or a strong sense of self-reliance. So this is a quote from one of the respondents. You kind of realize you look at life a lot differently when you have children. And if I didn't have him and I was in this situation, I wouldn't be in a shelter. I'd probably be trying to find another place to stay, or probably find another place I can lay my head at, like anything but a shelter. So I think this sort of goes back to this idea that, right, being a young parent can sort of shift your mindset and your priorities. And in this case, I think this youth is really talking about how, to her, it's basically, or I shouldn't say her, for this young youth, this person, it's sort of like a sacrifice, right? They're trying to do what's best for their child. And in this case, they felt like the best fit was a shelter. Next slide, please. Continuing on the same topic, a lot of the outcomes, the in-depth interviews talked about how they did not receive the need-based benefits for which they and their children were likely eligible. And I actually reached out, and I know one of the people in our local districts is on the call, and this particular person works very closely with actually a community health worker at our agency. And I actually reached out and spoke to her before I did this presentation a little bit. And this is one of the topics that actually came up, was this idea that they can't get their benefits, and they might not be getting their benefits because they may not be living with that person. Or obviously, if they're under 18, they can't always sort of, it doesn't always trickle down. And so there were some struggles with that. So some of the stats for this from the survey were 36% of homeless parents surveyed living with at least one child reported receiving TANF. 64% reported receiving WIC. And then follow-up benefit rates were lower, with 23% receiving TANF and 55% receiving WIC. So obviously those are much lower than we would expect to see, but there are, of course, systemic barriers, I think, at play here as well. Next slide, please. So this is sort of going back to the idea that it is hard to find homeless service providers serving pregnant and parenting youth under the age of 18. And I'll go a little bit into what's available in my area. But 21% of the homeless youth providers served young parents who are 13 to 17. 16% of the homeless family providers served young parents who were 13 to 17. 35% of the homeless youth providers served young parents who are 18 to 25, and 80% of the homeless family providers served young parents who were 18 to 25 years old. And you can obviously see that there's a much higher percentage that are serving those young parents that are those homeless young parents that are over the age of 18, because obviously when they're under 18, there are a whole slew of other barriers that are present. Next slide, please. So Ohio Basic Center Program, so BCP for short. So these are these emergency shelters for runaway homeless youth and their families. According to what I found, there were 9 Ohio Basic Center programs, mostly in central, southern, and eastern Ohio. There is one for Northwest Ohio homeless youth. They serve youth up to age 18. They offer food, clothing, counseling, medical referrals, family reunification support services. They have about 20 beds on average, and they do a 21 max day stay. Next slide, please. So this is the Northwest Ohio provider. It's run by the Zeph Center. It's called Safety Net. It is a 24-hour homeless youth shelter. It's temporary emergency shelter. They allow walk-ups, and they actually talk about how youth have actually walked up to 40 miles to go to the center. They do offer other things as well. They offer like a sort of like hangout room. I believe they offer showers to youth. So there's these other things that are available as well, even if they're not staying at that at the shelter itself. Next slide, please. So transitional living programs and maternity group homes. So this is sort of going back to this idea for runaway homeless youth and their families, focusing on safety, well-being, self-sufficiency, and building adult-based support. There are 6 Ohio transitional living and maternity homeless youth programs in central, southern, and eastern Ohio, and there are none in our area. So we unfortunately do not have any here for that. Next slide, please. Street outreach programs. So talking about sort of building this relationship with homeless and runaway youth. They focus on connecting to stable housing, self-sufficiency, prevention of sexual abuse and exploitation. Northwest Ohio is very, very high for human sex trafficking, especially for youth. I think we're still 4th in the nation right now. And so that is a huge issue here, and I think probably throughout Ohio as well. There are 6 of these present in Ohio. And again, there's one in Northwest Ohio, and that's Safety Net. Next slide, please. So this is just talking about our particular program. So this is the grant that we have through ODH. So we call this the Healthy Lucas County Housing Assistance Fund, and this is one of our programs. It is open to Lucas County homeless youth or youth who are at risk of homelessness. So this particular fund serves youth ages 14 to 24. We do try to be flexible with this. And this fund, right, goes back to, it serves the youth, but we also are able to serve clients who have youth in the home of these ages. So it might not be the youth who is directly enrolled with us, although they may be, but it could also be their mother who is maybe struggling with homelessness, and we can assist to sort of prevent that or end that homelessness. Our average assistance is around $750. We are flexible with that depending on what they need. We help with various things: security deposits, utility assistance, rental assistance. I have helped with, or sorry, I shouldn't say I, we have helped with various things, including back old rent. Some of our youth, and this is kind of, I think, unique to minors, we do have some youth who actually have had parents who have taken out utilities in their name without their knowledge. So we have assisted with that before. Obviously, one of the struggles we have with minors is that they are not able to rent if they are not 18 or older. So our program itself, the Northwest Ohio Pathways Hub, actually holds local Metropolitan Housing Authority vouchers. So we have an agreement with them, and it's specifically for pregnant or parenting women who are parenting children through the age of 1, their infant mortality-based vouchers. And one of the questions that we get a lot is, you know, I have this client and she's homeless, or she's going to be homeless soon, and can I get her a voucher? And we cannot allow them to apply because it is HUD until they're 18. And so that is a huge struggle for these youth, because even though they are responsible for another human being and they can make decisions based on that, they aren't always, or they're not able to get housing on their own. And they usually are just on their own. So that's definitely a struggle for them. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go over this. I think it's important to sort of have it here, but this is just HUD reporting data for the state of Ohio. So it talks a little bit about household type. If they have children, they don't have children, it's kind of hard to read, even I'm having a hard time reading it. And then the people in household with and without children. And then also breaking it down by race and gender as well. So I'm not going to go into detail with this, but it is here for your reference if you are interested. I know those slides are posted. Next slide, please. So risk factors and unique needs. So we know that 93% of homeless mothers report a history of trauma. And so this could be traumatic stress. It could be childhood abuse and neglect. Which we know that can sometimes be cyclical. And I know that many times our pregnant and parenting youth, sometimes they're involved with foster care. And I know sometimes they're in foster care and their child's in foster care, and they do have custody of their child, right? But they're still, they're in foster care themselves, which can be a tricky situation. Interpersonal violence, mental health issues, especially depression, substance use issues, prior homelessness, and then an impact on their current ability to parent. Next slide, please. Generational trauma of homelessness. So we know that children of homeless parents experience higher levels of stress. So higher levels of anxiety, lesser feelings of safety and stability. Experience adultification with worries about where they're going to live, their belongings, their pets, other family members, as well as higher rates of a childhood and adult mental health needs. So I think that this is Of course, we're always worried about the pregnant and parenting youth, but it's also really important to also recognize how that impacts their child in the future, right? And sort of the outcomes that come from that. And that's why I think this is such an important topic. Next slide, please. So this is actually for our particular program. So I pulled some data on our program. And this is for children. We pulled at ages 11 to 19 because I was kind of thinking children who would be, or minors who would be school age. And so the median age of someone enrolled into our program is 27 years old. So for us, the 11 to 19-year-old age demographic is a very small number, but it is also a growing number. And we have, of those, you can see that 66.1% are Black or African American, 27.8% are whites, and 11.1% are other. So this data is only from 2021, and this is, there were only 18 clients that we had in this age range. This does not include clients that we would be serving who have children of this age range. This is just a client who is actually enrolled into our program. We do have children, we do have clients in our program who are who have been pregnant at 11. So that's kind of where that number came from. Next slide, please. Okay, that is all I have. So I think we'll address questions at the end if you guys have anyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak, and hopefully this was helpful.
Thank you so much, Holly. And now we're going to pass it on to Nicole Harris for her presentation. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicole Harris, and I am the Chief Program Officer at the Center for Healthy Families. I also want to introduce Ms. Kara Davis, who was our program manager and has a very integral part in our housing program. So we're here today to present to you. Next slide, please. So what we like to do is strengthen the partnership between the Ohio Department of Education and the Center for Healthy Families. We know that without your support, your collaboration, homeless and pregnant and parenting teams will not be successful. Next slide. So who are we? At the Center for Healthy Families, we have been around since 2007. That's 14 years. We've been continuously serving pregnant and parenting teens in the greater Columbus, Ohio area. And we have three main pillars, which is direct service, advocacy, public policy, and information. We're dedicated staff. We have social workers, health providers, and we want our services to be client-centered, holistic, and really be able to be community-based, really meeting the participants where they are. Next slide. So how do we do that? We have a direct service model. Later in the presentation, you'll get to see who our partners are, but it's important that we engage teens where they live, where they work, where they're learning. So helping them be self-sufficient, helping them with positive networks, education, employment, and providing all those social supports that they're going to need to be successful. So we have 12 core partners that we work with in the community, from childcare to mentoring, to Nationwide Children's Hospital, to organizations that do self-sufficiency services, and our homeless youth, Huckleberry House in Columbus, Ohio, excuse me. We also have education through Ohio State, who helps with pregnant and parenting youth who are looking to increase their education. We have counseling services. And so we make sure that there's a warm transfer of the service. We have the partner, we make a call and make sure that that warm transfer relationship is transferred over to that young person to make sure that they get the services that they need. It's not just a referral. It's not just, here's a number. We make sure that that connection happens. And our goal this year is to serve 450 families in that program. Next slide. So in the last year, we've currently been serving 109 participants in our housing program. And while we have provided 84% participants with stable housing, we still have 60% of our participants who are unstably housed. So they're doubled up, they're experiencing intimate partner violence, living in vehicles, or as we say, living on the land. So living in places where they should not be. So it could be abandoned homes, it could be in a camp for homeless people. So definitely want to make sure that these services are provided to the youth. Next slide, please. So how do we do that? On this slide, if you guys can look at it, it's probably the social determinants of health that we've all have been talking about. But when you think about it, if you think of a tree, one of the things that's under the tree are the roots. And some of it is related to adverse living conditions. It could be unsafe neighborhoods, it's poverty, it's unemployment, it's segregation. And you see the red arrow of housing. We know that if a person's basic needs are not met, and housing is a basic need, they're not going to be coming to school to learn. It's going to be difficult for them to be able to engage in a learning environment. So one of the things that we make sure at the Center for Healthy Families is really helping them establish housing and basic needs so that they can go on to their next best. Next slide. So why this matters. One of the things that we want to do is create long-term realities for healthy moms and babies through the integrated housing and supportive services that we talked about. So our goal is to make sure that we're reducing that housing insecurity, we're decreasing that food insecurity, any energy insecurity, making sure they have lights and warmth so that they can be students, reducing infant mortality, helping with improved birth outcomes, reducing that ED usage and hospitalizations for mom and baby, and also increasing those well-child visits. Next slide, please. So
Okay.
Karen?
So as Holly kind of mentioned about some of the obstacles that surround this topic, COVID-19 was one of the great barriers. This definitely limited one-on-one instruction. It declined attendance in schools. Some of the children had IT issues with just even logging on and being able to complete their assignments. And they had to adapt to a new way of learning, not getting that one-on-one instruction. And at times, because of that, their grades are slipping. Another obstacle that they were facing at the beginning of the year was when the teachers went on strike in Franklin County. So this disrupted their education, once again, decreasing their ability to learn. So they're struggling to catch up to the curriculum, and teachers are struggling and pushing them forward to do so, which is causing a great impact on their grades as well. And all of that impacted students' education attainment. Next slide, please. Some of the special considerations, it would be having knowledge and trainings regarding social determinants of health, just being able to give those resources that are tangible and being the experts on where these individuals need to go for support. Schools engaging with students to complete surveys. Now, this could be through online or even something tangible as a piece of paper, just to get a better picture and concept of what's going on in the home. Students should have access to trusted caregivers and things like that. We need to be involved with the family as a whole. That could be the student, or that should be the student. If the student has a child, and any caregivers, any mom, dad, sometimes grandma, grandpa, aunts and uncles, whoever that support system is for these individuals. Creating outlets for children, for youth with lived experience. So sometimes these individuals don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about the situations. So just creating those safe spaces for them to express themselves in ways that are healthy and offer them support. Next slide, please. Other special considerations would be having care for youth in the schools. When certain individuals go through these kind of things, they sometimes lack things such as having access to showering, washing clothes, spaces to, safely sleep and rest. So we definitely need to be cognitive about those things and try to have some resources available for them so that they can complete those things that maybe we take for granted, such as showering, just being mindful and paying attention of things such as like torn or soiled clothing or clothing that is repeatedly worn. Another thing that we should consider is their access to their mental health needs and assessing that. Um, when you go through these situations, sometimes that could definitely take a toll on your mental health. And coupled with that, it could be a lack of nutrition. So just being able to provide these individuals with support regarding nutrition, whether it's maybe even a free lunch or an extra lunch. Getting youth involved in positive activities. Sometimes when they are involved in extracurriculars like band, baseball, or even a support group for them, that could be their only outlet that they have to keep them in a positive mindset. Identifying youth identifying the people that the youth can trust in the hardships. As mentioned, sometimes they do not want to necessarily open up about these situations. So just making sure that they have someone safe that they could trust and talk to about their experience so they could get the support that they need. And also school readiness, which is just promoting healthy development, preparing children to succeed in school and beyond, further education, and promoting family economic stability. Next slide.
So here is some data that we wanted to share, and we definitely pulled this from our partners at COHHIO. When you think about if young people are homeless, they also may be having some disabling conditions. So we had 506 youth who were homeless who had mental health disorders. So that could be anxiety, depression, developmental disabilities. It could be learning. It could be other educational literacy issues. We often have found that there's young people who have graduated and don't have literacy. They cannot read. And so imagine going 12 years of school and being homeless and not having the support that you need, trying to find a job and housing for yourselves. So our staff are reading leases with young people, helping them fill out applications for employment and for school. Also chronic health conditions, it could be high blood pressure, it could be diabetes, it could be other high cholesterol, things that impact their ability to learn, and also physical disabilities. Next slide, please. So what's next? Definitely looking at partner collaboration, creating some sustainability, engaging youth, and mastering community resources. So looking at what types of trainings would be great for this population. Trauma-informed care. I'm sure everyone has heard that, but I think really you coming from a trauma-informed lens versus what did you do versus what happened to you. Looking at implicit bias. A lot of times pregnant and parenting teens, there is bias. There's times where they go for services and they get negative feedback about, you're pregnant, you have a baby, you're grown now. Think about developmentally, if you're got pregnant at 16 and you are, this is your development, where they are developmentally and intellectually. Sometimes we may have negative stereotypes about teens who are pregnant. And so I think really being transparent with yourself about, do you have bias for young people who are pregnant or parenting, as well as homeless, and being able to take a step back and think about how can you support what are things that you may need to do to be able to really lean into this uncomfortableness. As well as Partnership for Success has cognitive coaching, adaptive schools, and they have various trainings that will be beneficial to the school personnel. Looking at diversity and inclusion. Diversity is no longer just race and ethnicity. It's no longer for male or female. There are lots of things that come with diversity and inclusion. So any training that will be able to provide support around that. And also culture humility. It used to be culture competency, but really culture humility. Can I put myself in this person's shoes? Am I able to really be able to help them? And what is their culture? There is a culture for people who are homeless. They're very resourceful, as well as if I'm pregnant or parenting, what does that culture look like? Next slide, excuse me.
Here I wanted to highlight a success story that one of the participants that we were working with was able to do. So you can feel free to read it, and I'll kind of summarize it for you guys today. So when Kara came to the Center for Healthy Families, she was homeless and she was actually pregnant. She had aspirations of finishing school because she was in the 12th grade at the time, and just getting stable and safe housing. So she had a positive attitude, and she was able to work with her resource advocate to complete schooling. The resource advocate was able to find her housing, get her linked with HUD and other programs so that she could have that stable housing. Ultimately, she was able to do that. But prior to getting into that position, she struggled. She didn't know where to turn. She didn't know how to fill out the application. She actually graduated from high school, had a healthy baby, and is going to go to college to further her education. So just having that limited, that support at times can just give these individuals hope to, keep them pressing forward. Next slide, please.
So looking at personal lived experience, I, as a child, was raised by two people who were 16 years old. So when we think about pregnant and parenting youth, this sort of hits home for me. Both my parents were 16. And so I sometimes call it, in transparency, being raised by wolves. Two 16-year-olds don't know what to do, didn't know what to do. My father was from a prominent family here in Columbus. So he was able to relocate to Massachusetts and go to prep school and graduate from college and be able to go on and be successful. My mom, though, she, at the time, born in 1972, there was unheard of young people pregnant in school. So she had to go to night school and she had to work. And so I remember being homeless at 2 years old, walking down the street in the middle of the night after she got into a fight with her mother, and really not having stable housing until I was 5 years old, living with aunts and uncles. So I know for sure that I had caring, trusted adults. I had resources. I had people who looked out for me, who enabled me to be who I am today. I never would have thought that, based on some of the statistics of being born to teenage parents, being homeless as a toddler from 2 to 5 years old, couch surfing, I would be here presenting to you today, having a master's degree, going to the Ohio State University on a scholarship. So you never know who your student is going to be in the future. And so I really want to call to action to you that it's all our problem. It's all our responsibility to make sure that pregnant and parenting and homeless students get the support that they need. Next slide. So who should be involved? As I said, it's all of our responsibilities, from the principal, teachers, nurses, social workers, PTA, to the janitor. It's all our responsibilities. It's sort of that if you see something, do something, you're concerned, if you have a gut feeling about a student, making sure that you engage. I think Holly did a great job of talking about the ODJFS and the benefits. Young people who are under 18 do not have access to those benefits. It's responsible for their caregiver to trickle those down, and sometimes they do not. And then looking at community partners, who are the experts to make the referrals, not duplicating the services. Who are the experts in your community who can you can get the young person and their family to the services. One of the things that the center prides itself on is tertiary. We are 3 generations deep. So it's our young person, it's their child, and it's their family, and really providing services in a holistic approach. Next slide. So resources, any emergency rental assistance, homeless providers, local 211 numbers. All of these are resources in your area, your community shelter board. Next slide. And these are our wonderful partners in Central Ohio, and we could not thank them enough for really helping coordinate services for young people in the Central Ohio area. And that is our presentation. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much for your time today. We are getting close to the end of our session, but we do have a couple minutes for Q&A. So if you do have any questions for our guest speakers, feel free to put them in the Q&A box in the chat as we're wrapping up. And we will also be sharing the information, the emails of our guest speakers after this session. So if you have any follow-up questions, you can reach out to them on your own. So it's a couple quick COHHIO Course to Home reminders. Our next session will be on May 17th and will be focused on children and youth with disabilities who are experiencing homelessness. And then later this year, we will have sessions on BIPOC and LGBTQ+ youth and supporting the health and well-being of students at risk of or experiencing homelessness. As always, you can reach us at COHHIO for technical assistance at homelesseducation@cohio.org. We're always here to provide you resources or guidance. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. If you are not already on our mailing list, please make sure that you join it. Ami will be posting a link in the chat for that. And we also would love to hear your feedback about today's session, and Ami will be sharing that link shortly as well. And of course, we have some resources on the slides for you, and the slides have been shared in the chat and will also be in our follow-up materials. And that is it for today. So feel free to use these last few minutes for any questions for our guest speakers. And if not, then we will see you next time.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. And also, if you can take like a few minutes to complete our survey for the community of practice for our next topics, that would be awesome. I just shared the link in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you to our wonderful guest speakers. This was awesome. Okay, so let's see in the Q&A. Okay, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your story from Maria Lee. Any questions? Thank you. Thank you. Have a great rest of the day, and we will see you next time. Thank you very, very much. You are welcome, Courtney. Thank you for joining us. And I am gonna stop. Thank you.